All right, so with the Helm chart installed, we can check on our Kubernetes cluster and see how it's doing. We can see that all of the services, all the pods are in a running state, so that's a good sign, and that there are no running cert manager processes in terms of making sure that we do the validation to generate your SSL certificates. So we can test this quickly. If we go back to our installation instructions, we saw that we created a couple of different DNS zones for us. So you can see here that we have a collector endpoint, so we can then hit that endpoint to see if we're able to access it, because that's where we're going to be sending events to. So for example, I will go ahead and put in this endpoint. And so you can see collector.DennisDemo is valid. It's returning a 404 because we're not actually hitting the event ingestion endpoint, but we know it's live and it's available to receive requests, which will validate once we actually set up a test project to be able to send events. So at this point, the cluster is installed. We can go back to the main README, and we can basically just follow the rest of the user documentation in terms of how we can actually set up product analytics. So in terms of enabling product analytics, we can now follow the instructions here in terms of setting up a provider. So in this case, this is a self-managed provider. This is something that you want to have in complete control of. And so for GitLab.com, you can connect a self-managed provider as to the project of your choosing within GitLab.com. And then if you're running your own self-managed instance or dedicated instance, then you can define that at the instance level, in which case that will cascade down to any other projects you define in that instance. Of course, depending on your needs, you may want to deploy in a specific region where a specific project might have clear requirements in terms of where you process and store data. And so that project level connection is still available to customize as you need, if you need to deploy multi-region for FedRAMP and so on. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and deploy this connect this product analytics cluster to a project on GitLab.com. So I have a test project here in terms of being able to connect to. So I'm going to go ahead and create the project, call it, 2024-26. That's when this demo was recorded. And then just create the project. And then looking at the instructions, I can do this at the project level settings. So if I go into the settings of my project and then analytics, I can go ahead and configure product analytics. So it's asking for a couple pieces of information here. So you're going to need to look into your custom values YAML because it contains a couple of these instructions. But for the first, we're going to go ahead and include the collector and cube, which can be indicated by collector and cube. And now we also have configurator, but we're going to need to put the credentials in here as well. So let's go ahead and take a look. And we're also going to need the cube API key as well. So let's go back into our values YAML file. Again, these are hard coded in plain text right now, but ideally you use your own secrets manager to do this more securely. But for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to copy all of this information here. So that's the configurator credentials and then the API key for the cube querying layer. So going back to this, we're going to use the password, username and password for the configurator, and then we're going to put in the API key for cube. So we're just going to do a quick look. That looks correct to me. Actually, this is wrong. That's correct. Yep, that's right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save. So, all right, going back to the instructions, you can see that these settings were successfully updated. At this point, we can then go to onboarding a GitLab project. So to be able to get onboard a GitLab project, you need to have a developer role or higher, but since we're already in the settings, that means you have to be maintainer or higher. But to find where product analytics is, it's in the Analyze Analytics Dashboards area. So we're going to go to Analyze Analytics Dashboards. And then here you can see product analytics. It's grayed out because we have not set it up. We've just connected it to a cluster to be able to set it up. So let's go ahead and click set up. And so you can see on the self-managed provider, because we created our own product analytics cluster, we see the information here that we want to connect to. And so we can proceed with that step. It's also worth noting that we are planning to offer a managed offering in terms of us providing the product analytics stack for you. So keep an eye out for that coming Q2 of this year, 2024. But for the purposes of this demo, let's take a look at the self-managed provider and connect to our own provider. So this is going to run through the configuration to onboard your project to the cluster, and it's going to return a bunch of different information in terms of how you can set up that instrumentation. So we can see here that we have the SDK host. This is the collector, right? This is what's going to be receiving the events that we set up previously with the Helm chart. And we also see that we have an application ID, which helps to identify the events that is coming from this specific application that belongs to this project. We include some instructions for JavaScript just because that is a very common use case in terms of tracking and instrumenting events. And so we have a couple of ways to do this in terms of just copying and pasting the ability to instantiate the JavaScript SDK, as well as being able to track a page view. The SDKs themselves have a lot more information about how they work, whether they are for the browser, for Ruby, Python, Node, and so on. And so you can see a lot of different ways you can customize how the browser SDK works in terms of tracking cookie consent, whether you want page pings. We have a couple of different plugins to enhance the functionality in terms of being able to track link clicks and things like that. So definitely take a look at the documentation in terms of how our SDKs work, in terms of how we can fit the instrumentation to your needs. So going back though, we are going to go ahead and set up a test project to be able to send events to our product analytics cluster, since we now have an application ID.